That's it. We've finally reached the final episode of our live stream series. And actually, if I have a bad memory, so I was wondering, how long has it been? When was the first episode aired? Really, I didn't remember. And I double checked just now, so hopefully you can all see my screen. Turns out the first episode was early February, so it's been 4 months and a half of fun and of work. I mean, not my work. Glenn did all the hard work. I just did the initial talking. So yeah, but we're here. We are finally towards the end of the series. And before I quickly introduce what it's going to be about, as you may have heard, Graph Connect happened last week, and you have access to the keynotes already. So there is a Graph Connect keynote by Emil, if you want to learn about what's coming next, what's the vision for what's coming next, etc. And also another fun keynote as well from Jim, so the chief scientist of Neo4j. Very insightful, very personal experience with Neo4j along the years. So I think he started very early in Neo4j, like 2009 or 2008 maybe. So quite fun, quite interesting. But since we are talking about Graph Connect here, I was wondering, I couldn't go, unfortunately, but I know Glenn actually went there. So yeah, what was your impression of Graph Connect overall, Glenn?
It was a lot better than expected, to be honest. I had lots of fun. So for me, the best part were just the people there. They were all really pretty nice. They were all really into graph databases, and so there was always something to talk about. Um, the talks themselves were also really insightful. There were quite a few ones that I still remember. Um, so yeah, it was really diverse. Like I went to a talk of a guy that built a software to write novels. Then there were other people that made like really impressive graph visualizations. I learned a lot about some cipher optimizations that I didn't know about. So yeah, overall it was really good. Texas is hot. It was like 38, 39 degrees Celsius. So 100 plus Fahrenheit as well. Also pretty humid. But the city was pretty nice. Like there was also a lot of nature there, and it was really calm. So overall, it was really good. And I got this nice swag from Graph Connect as well. So yeah, I'd advise it next time to go if you can.
Nice.
You get the
I'm,
opportunity.
I'm I'm jealous now, actually. I'm jealous. I wish I could have that swag. Maybe I will negotiate something internally. We'll see.
Yeah, I
And
hope
so,
so. Will there be multiple Graph Connects during the year, or is it only once a year?
So that's a good question, and I will need to double check. But as far as I remember, there were only one event per year, or maybe two, one in Europe, one in the Americas. I'm not completely sure. I would need. Yeah, my memory fails me here as usual, as it does. But yeah, maybe a couple at most, but that would be it really. All right. So thanks for sharing your impressions. That actually makes it a little more concrete for people who could not join the event. So yeah, if you can join it next time, even maybe submit a talk, will be even greater. And now back to the topic at hand, which is the PHP client for Neo4j, and we are gonna revisit what we've been doing so far. So let me share my screen again. So if you missed what we've been doing before, so where were you for the last 4 months and a half? I don't know, but you're welcome to join now. So what we've been doing is, if you go to realworld.io, you will be redirected here, is the real world example app. So basically the idea is to build a medium.com clone. So medium.com, for those who don't know, is a blogging platform. And you have two parts. You have the front end, you have the back end. And obviously here we're building a back end in PHP with the Neo4j client. But today we're gonna have, and when I say we, actually, I should exclude myself because again, Glenn is doing the hard work. We're gonna use, I'm still saying we anyway. We're gonna use NeoEloquent, but for that, so as you can see, it's in the Vinelab organization. And Glenn asked me, hey, could we invite maybe a special guest for that? And without further ado, Abed, here you go. welcome to the stream. So, Abed, I hope we can see you. I think your screen is a bit frozen, but maybe audio works. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. So, if audio works, then yeah, if you can introduce yourself, that would be great. If audio doesn't work, then we'll have to rely on Plan B and go forward and have a maybe you will have a chance to join later. Okay, I think your screen moves slowly, but maybe audio works. So yeah, can you hear us, Abed, and can you introduce yourself? All right, let's try again. Hey, hello. It seems to work now, right? Yeah,
Yeah, I'm here.
perfect. So yeah, Abed, can you introduce yourself? So I just talked very briefly about NeoEloquent, but yeah, can you introduce yourself in general so that people get to know you a little bit more?
Yes, of course. So my name is Abed Halawi. I'm from Lebanon, Beirut, and I reside there now. NeoEloquent was one of the libraries that I worked on as an original author. Basically, just like any other open source project, it's usually originating from a dire need for something to work. And we were at the time when we were building a platform of user-generated content, which basically makes total sense to have a highly connected data with that. And it was at the time when I did not know about graph databases at all. I had no idea. It was back in 2014, I remember, if I remember correctly. And I had finished the data model in a relational database, and every time I looked at it, I got scared completely. It was horrifying to look at all of these tables that you need to start with just at the beginning of the project, and we hadn't even started. And I had already knew that it was just an MVP version of what we were building. And I know, as we all know, that data models change a lot during the development and during the evolution of any kind of project. So I started with the research, and funny enough, actually, I had a variety or a version of the relational data model that was drawn in a graph, more like a graph model. So I started looking for other schemaless or more any sort of database that can contain this kind of change, this kind of development or evolution of the data model. And I landed on Neo4j. It was back then around version 3, maybe 3.2, 3.5, I don't remember exactly, but it was at a time when it was at a very early stage. And I was amazed. I was completely astonished by what you can do with Neo4j back then. To keep it brief, I just consider myself extremely lucky to have seen how the community has grown and how the adoption of Neo4j has grown. It got serious adoption in really critical usages. And I consider myself to be extremely lucky to be part of this community. And right now, especially recently, thanks to guys like you, Florent, Glenn, and others like Michal and Maren, who are taking this to a completely different level right now. And I'm really happy to be part of this.
And we're very lucky to have you and people like you, very involved in the communities that can make things happen. Because without people like you, we wouldn't have the PHP clients that we know today. We would still be stuck with an outdated PHP connector, and the community would be overall stuck. So yeah, thanks to all of you actually. And thanks a lot for this introduction. And you know what? I'm just gonna let Glenn and you take over the session, and so see all the good that NeoEloquent does on a project. So I will just hide myself in a corner, monitor the chat, and forward any questions. So have fun. See ya.
Okay, so hi everyone. So maybe to get started a little bit, the real world example was built with Laravel. The reason I chose Laravel was because the other examples that I built were with other simpler frameworks like Slim, for example. and I wanted to have more like a more popular framework this time around. So that's why I chose it. And I knew in hindsight, I knew in advance that probably NeoEloquent would be done by then. So that would make it really interesting to first develop the application with Laravel. But we had to restrain ourselves in a lot of ways because we couldn't really integrate it in a lot of the existing features. So we still did a lot of like normal naked queries. And basically, we had a working version of Real World like 1 or 2 episodes ago, where it completely worked. Then we refactored it a little bit, so we grew it as an actual application from a chaotic beast that just worked to something that was a little bit more organized. And then NeoEloquent started to get to be done. So we would already, I believe, the previous episode we already used some of the features. And when I say done, I mean the newer version. Of course, there is already a working version which you can use, but this is version 2 that we are working on. And yeah, so that is basically why we're here together. Like I built a README going over all of the features that are available in the newer version. And I thought it would be interesting to invite Abed to talk about like how these things changed, what could be better, how we could go continue in the future, stuff like that. So for me, like I think I'm going to preach to the wrong audience. I think you guys already know this, but I've built like in the top of the README, I built some of the advantages of NeoEloquent. So I think we can go over this pretty quickly. So let me go over this. Like if you're using Laravel, you know that the ecosystem is massive. There are a bunch of packages available, and not just the packages, but the framework itself already out of the box can do so much stuff. And the version 2 really wants to achieve feature parity with the other drivers that are in there. What I mean by that is when you're using a query builder or if you're using Eloquent, you're using usually a SQL database out of the box. This library really wants to make it painless to move to Cypher and to Neo4j if you want to. So if you're using this library, you're going to have a frictionless migration between the two databases. You'll also get, of course, extreme performance gains if you're working with relational data. There will be some increased functionality, mostly in the future. Create with is already available, and I think that is something that Abed is probably best qualified for to explain because he was the pioneer of that feature. Another feature that I'd like to implement in the future would just be n-degree relations. So right now we have has many, and there will be has many true. But why stop there? We could have like longer paths as well, but we still have to decide on an API for that. And of course, Cypher is available to you if you're using Neo4j. You can do a lot more with Cypher than you can do with SQL. But the original implementation, of course, assumes SQL, so you're a bit limited there. So if you need it, you can use Cypher. If you're not really verbose in Cypher, this package is perfect for you because you will only have to use the Cypher language if you've reached the limits of the query builder. The configuration will be easy. You can have migrations. As Abed was already saying, the database is essentially schemaless, but you can still use the migrations to build indexes or basic constraints, or just if you want to move data around between instances, that can be done in a migration as well. Because we're using the new driver under the hood, it supports more complex deployments. So you can use the newest version of Neo4j, you can use Neo4j Aura, you can use Cluster as a single instance. You shouldn't really have to care what your deployment is in this example, because the driver will automatically connect to it. And then, as I said, there will be because it is so tightly integrated into Laravel, it will have built-in integration with all the packages. Like in the end, if we have time, we can go over the roadmap and stuff like that. But basically the gist of it. And of course, it's still in an alpha stage. That means no one should be using this in production right now. So yeah, you can refer again to the roadmap to see what still has to be done before it's all fully finished. And once it is, we're gonna make a big noise and gonna make sure that everybody knows about it. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, so the basic stuff really hasn't changed. Like here's an example of how to install it. Of course, the version doesn't add up, but it's a normal Composer installation. And then, of course, if you want to configure it, that's the stuff that when it starts to get interesting. So if you decide that Neo4j will be your only database, you can make it your default connection, and then you need to add it here as well. And you can see in this project, because I've cheated a little bit, I've taken the real world example and I've added NeoEloquent as a submodule in here. So we have access to both repositories at once. But if we're going to take a look here in the configuration, you can see in the database tab, like it uses a default. I set it to default can be Neo4j, and then here in the connection, we are saying like, okay, which database, username, password, stuff like that. And you can find this in the env file here as well. You can see that everything is added there. So just for fun, I have created a command, I believe. Yeah, I called it playground command. So we will be using this command to like build examples on the fly. So because it's so tightly integrated, we can not just use Eloquent, but we can use like the query builder itself. So we can go directly like this, and we can say, let's have our table article. And if you want to inspect the query, we can use something like DD as a tool. So if I'm going to run this, it should be something like PHP artisan. I think I called it this. Yeah. See, there we go. So this is how you can start to, if you want to start learning about Cypher, if you're just coming from a Laravel background, you can just use your normal query builder, have a table, and do like a DD on this. So it can, of course, become a little bit more complex. You can start doing like where the title is equal to my awesome blog posts, for example. If you do it now, you can see that the DD becomes a little bit more interesting. Like here is an article where the title is equal to, and it uses a parameter, and the parameters are found here. So it automatically generates the parameters here. But of course, if you want to change connections, if you want to have another one, like I have added some examples. If you say like, okay, I want to go back to the MySQL connection, it'll of course also change the query. So if you do it like this, it becomes a select. So that's how you can easily start moving data around. For example, you can just switch around the connections and the queries will change accordingly. Okay. So let's take a look at the README again. That's the wrong one. So we've configured it. And then, of course, if you want to define a model, you can just extend from the model. Again, because it's so tightly integrated, you can extend from a Laravel model as well. But if you're doing that, instead of extending from a NeoEloquent model, you will be losing some of the nice helper features, such as the create with, stuff like that. These methods will not be made available to you. And then, yeah, that's basically it. And we can start going over like usage examples. I've built it into the real world example, so we can take a look how to do it there as well. But there is a short list available of all the features that are using database in Laravel, and that means that these will work like these will work just from outside the box. So how do I say this again in English? I'm sorry, my language. So there are certain validation rules in Laravel that we can use. Broadcasting. We don't use broadcasting in the real world app. Route model binding we do. Notifications still and queues we don't use, but authentication, authorization we do. The database, query builder, pagination, migrations, seeding, and Eloquent by itself. So yeah, then we are basically arriving at the relationships. I think this is the most powerful feature that Laravel Eloquent provides. It was also the most difficult feature to get it working. And long story short, the one-to-one and one-to-many relationships work already, but the many-to-many relationships don't yet. And we'll have a discussion about that in a few minutes. But the one-to-one and one-to-many examples just already work outside of the box. And I think I'm gonna have to ask Abed about how it worked in the previous version, because I've changed it in version 2. But I believe Abed, you asked me a question like an hour ago about why I moved to the has one relationship. So I was wondering how you did it in the previous version.
I tried to make it as with the feature parity. I tried to make it extremely simple to just switch from a database to another, as you just mentioned earlier. So it caused a lot of headaches, honestly, because there are so many aspects that you will need as a boilerplate just to pass things through to get things working. So I think it was wise from your side to adopt this kind of approach where you have a complete freedom to go outside the boundaries of what is required internally. So previously it would just create internally, of course, some sort of a translation from the builder to the grammar class, and then that you get the cipher for that relationship. And it used to be somehow a bit difficult to maintain, and this is one of the reasons why you would see in some areas that it got updated for a period of time, and then we followed up based on what was changing in Laravel, because the framework was constantly evolving, and we couldn't evolve it as such.
Yeah. Yeah, so indeed, like I think the main issue with the previous, if we would stay and use the original methods like the has one instead of has one relationship, it required like the foreign keys. That's basically the main issue that I had, because of course we don't want to use foreign keys. That's the entire point of the relational database, that we don't have these expensive joins and we use the relationships by ourselves. So like the rule of thumb that that I've used here is, if it is a relationship that is because the terminology gets confusing really quick, because relationship is used interchangeably between Laravel, Neo4j, and the foreign keys relationship. So what I'm trying to say with the Laravel relationship, if Laravel provides a relationship, it, like for example, has one, has many, stuff like that. If it is possible in Neo4j as well, we just attached the word relationship after that Laravel relationship. So the has one becomes has one relationship. The belongs to becomes belongs to relation. Stuff like that. And because we're probably the watchers of the live stream, some of them will be used to Neo4j, others of them will be used to Laravel, and a few of them will be used to both. So just to make sure that everyone is up to speed, Laravel Relationships is basically a way to connect different models between each other, and it makes it really easy, trivial even, to connect two instances of models to each other in the database, query them, stuff like that. So if we want to go ahead and take a look at an example of this, because I've completely filled the real world example right now. If you go into the controllers, let's take a look. For example, the let's go to the comment controller. If you want to comment, like this is all full Laravel. So there is no normal naked queries anymore, like it was previously. But long story short, the comment has a relationship defined called article. If you take a look here, you can see it is a belongs to relation. It belongs to the article through the relationship has comment. So that's all the information you need to provide to NeoEloquent for it to be able to resolve these kinds of relationships. And a relationship itself is nothing more than a query builder with some extended features. For example, here you can see there is an associate method, and that will associate the provided article. So you can see here we have a request, which we will use to validate the body and to fetch the data. But we also used route model binding to just receive the article normally. So we don't even need to do like the queries ourselves, do a find on the article. The instance will just be there. So you can see here we created a comment. I added some helper documentation for the editor. So what we say here is we created one. We create a comment from the body, and then we will attach an article to it. So we will associate it with that one, and we're done. Then, of course, I use the resource functionality because it's a JSON API to just to just return the comment. And you can see here if you go to the comment resource, the relationships can just be used if you can just be fetched immediately through this functionality here. So we have defined an author relationship, and then of course Laravel enjoys a lot of magic. So if you define the relationship like this, you can access the actual instance attached to it as a member variable. So that's essentially what's happening here. So that's how we can easily attach this highly relational data and work with it without having these complex queries and stuff like that. So this is an example of these kinds of relationships. So if you go back to the README, there we go. So there is a one-to-one relationship. The direction defines this. So if we use a has one, the relation is outgoing. So the user has a phone that is related to phone. And then, of course, if we are in the phone model, we can define a user relationship, and that's a belongs to. So what will happen there is it'll have a phone, a phone that is related to a user, but it's the direction it is going from the user to the phone. So it's an incoming relationship now instead of an outgoing one. And then there isn't really a big difference between one-to-one and one-to-many relationships when it comes to Neo4j. In the database, there is even no difference. Like I built a note on this. I wrote a note on this. But the relationships are just the same. So there is a has many and a belongs to. A has many means that there are outgoing relationships that have many instances, and the incoming relationship will just have a single instance. So that's the inverse. But the only difference really between one to many and one to one is just limiting them. That's basically saying the belongs to relationship. No, I mean the has one relationship has a limit of one, and it's on top of the application layer, not of the database layer. So this is quite in depth already. You shouldn't really worry about that, but this is for the people that are really aware of what's going on right now. And then the final one, this one isn't done yet. This is the many-to-many one. The many-to-many one is when we're thinking about a SQL database, what's happening there is there are two tables that are important that have the juicy information, but they can there are multiple instances that can be related for each other to each other. For example, A good example would be tags to an article. A tag can have many articles attached to it, but an article can also have many tags attached to it. So that's a many-to-many relationship. And in a SQL database, what you would do is these two tables are the ones that are really important. Those are like the payload. But then there is a third table called a pivot table, and those will be the ones that are holding the foreign keys. So they're bidirectional. Of course, we don't need that, this pivot table, that's not necessary at all in Neo4j. So what happens instead is, because there is a pivot table, people have been adding payload information in the pivot table as well. For example, you might attach something like if the relationship is active or not still, when it was created. There could just be plain data in there as well. So the pivot table can be queried upon as well. That means that the relationship in Neo4j also kind of behaves like a table, in the sense that it has values, can have different values attached to it in the case of a belongs to many relation. So that is why it is going to take me a little bit longer still before it's continued, because right now the tables are assumed to be nodes, while they can now also be a relationship. So there will be some thinking still that will have to be done before we can completely implement it. I think I will have to change screens if I want to show this in the documentation of a many-to-many relation. But yeah, I also don't think that there is time for that. So yeah, and then I think the most interesting part that follows from all of this is polymorphic relationships. And this is something that blows your mind if you're into the SQL, if you're coming from the SQL world, because what is happening there is all the relationships that we've been talking about, the one-to-one, the one-to-many, many-to-many ones, they're always immediately attached to a different table. The table really can't change, which means that the model can't change as well, because the model is attached to the table. Whereas if we're talking in Neo4j from a relationship, the relationship itself does not care about the labels attached or the type of node that it comes from and where it goes to. That means that all these morph to, because the problem that polymorphic relationship solves is they're not using foreign keys anymore in the database, so you lose a lot of performance. Like it's an insane amount of performance that you lose, because you're not even using foreign keys anymore, but you're building queries like you're building the queries based on the provided logic. So for example, you might have a table that says I point to some table based on a key, and then you will have the name of the table it refers to. So the query will dynamically choose a table it uses, and then uses a where query to look for the correct key. Whereas this is just not relevant anymore in Neo4j, because you can have all these types of relationships without having to morph them, because they want the query that you are using for a polymorphic relationship or a normal relationship does not change, besides for the label that's being used. So if you're in the process of migrating to a different database, you can leave the morph twos, because they will just work out of the box. But you're just giving yourself a bigger headache. You can just use belongs to relation, has one relation, stuff like that. There's a translation table available here. So yeah, I don't know if you have something to add to this, Abed, or if you're missing something that was available in the previous version.
I wouldn't add anything really. I would just mention that one of the most interesting aspects of, since you were talking about has one and has many, etc., the sync function is a very important aspect of Eloquent in general. And I've personally used that in every single project I've used. Any sort of database, with it, be it a relational, or most probably it would be a graph database, when syncing records. So removing and adding, and the attach, detach, these are extremely useful functions, and it's great that we could have them here out of the box, even with the new implementation as well. When it comes to morphing, it was always strange to think about. I always thought about it as some sort of a trio label kind of node. Like you have a user commented on a post, and this makes a trio, and whenever you want to grab that record, you would use a morph. But now that it's been even simplified further, this showcases the simplicity when using a graph database.
Thanks. So yeah, good stuff overall. So yeah, I think I've defined some of these in the existing resources. So for example, I was talking about tags. So here is an example of a many-to-many relationship. So you can see here the articles has a belongs to many relation based on the article. The only thing that is a real gotcha here is that a pivot table has no direction. It's bidirectional, whereas relationships are always directional. So the way I've solved this right now, and this is still like under discussion, so if somebody else has a better idea, I'd love to hear it. But the way I solved it now is just to require someone to add the direction of the relationship in basically the name of the relationship. So what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, the tag is connected to the article, and the relationship goes from article that is being tagged like that. And if we are going to the article, I think I've defined the inverse as well. Yeah, there's some more complex stuff in here. Yeah, tags. So this one goes in the opposite direction. So here we're saying that it is being tagged. So that's the only thing that I think is a little bit more convoluted in some sense. In some other sense, not really. So yeah, that's something interesting to mention. Also, because all these relationships in Laravel are query builders, you can just use it as a query builder. For example, I have this method here to check if it is favorited by itself. So what I do here is I have a belongs to of a favorite relationship with the user, and I just filter it if it is equal to the ID of the user that's being logged in. So that way it's really easy to query if the user has favorited an article by itself, because these things are required by the API. If we are going to look in the API documentation, you can see very clearly that it requires in the result set whether or not the user follows the article or not. So yeah, that solves quite a lot of these kinds of problems. Here also is a nice example of using a package that builds on top of Laravel and the Eloquent builders. So this is the Slug library from Spatie, also Antwerp-based, where I'm from. Yeah, so we can just use this as normal because they are just using the query builder. So you get all this functionality just built in. So we're saying here, build a slug from the title and save it to the slug property in this case. So let's go back to the README. This, I think, is this is something really for Abed. He's the one who came up with this. I think it's really interesting stuff. So I've just left the documentation as it was still. So yeah, go ahead, the create with functionality, Abed.
So I found myself, especially when working on exactly that kind of example that you're showing, the article, the comment, and the user, etc., and the tags. I found myself creating records and retrieving. Have to create them as relations. So I found that often I would need to create multiple records at the same time, but to do that, it would require several steps. Maybe with SQL, you would need to do that in order to get an entire cluster, let's say, an entire record to be created in several tables. But this is not the case with NeoEloquent, and not the case with Neo4j. This showcases also the power of Cypher, where you could um, create several nodes or maybe create an entire cluster of records, regardless of the number of labels that you have or the number of nodes and relations, it doesn't matter. You could create all of these in one hit. And when it comes to applications, we all know that we need to access the database as little as possible. We need to keep our querying or back and forth communication with the database to the least possible. And this function helps achieve that. I consider it to be extremely powerful because you can create a record and either create other records with it, other nodes that have other labels completely different, altogether as new records, or you can create a new record and relate it to existing records as documentation showcases as well. So that was mainly the motivation behind it, so that you can create a cluster with one database hit and take advantage of the power of Cypher through that.
Yeah, good stuff. It's really impressive. When I looked at that, it really just clicked. And indeed, the number of queries, it's a balance, because there is also some of advice in Neo4j itself to not have the queries too big or complex. But I think the trade-off that is happening here basically is that all the network calls are blocking in PHP. So in the interest of having like really quick queries, you're just doing like one round trip. So that's basically where it's coming from. And I have to agree with Abed that it can have major performance increases.
So quick interruption for you guys. There is a question from Alexander from Ukraine asking from YouTube. So I'm just gonna show the question real quick and read it aloud. So the question is, what package do you use to work with Neo4j in PHP? So I think there are multiple answers to that, and I will let you answer.
Yeah, so me, of course, the driver, so the driver and the client is really, in my opinion, right now, the sweet spot. It's really tested very well. It's got a couple of thousand downloads a month, and there aren't really that many issues anymore. I've been using it in production myself for quite a long time, and a real chef should enjoy its own cooking. And yeah, basically that's it. And I'm hoping that in a few weeks I can tell you that you can use NeoEloquent as well. Might be that for production. If you're not doing it for work and just for a hobby, please use NeoEloquent so you can get some valuable feedback. That's basically my point of view. I don't know if you anything to add to that, Abed?
I would only add that at the beginning of creating this package, I was hoping that I could get it to work without needing Laravel as a framework, be it using another framework or just vanilla PHP. It's up to the developer to decide. Currently, I'm not aware of the state of whether we could or could not, but maybe with a few lines of boilerplate, maybe you can get it to work outside of Laravel. But for now, I think I would second what you just said.
Yeah, also I forgot to mention, if you're really interested of getting down to the nitty-gritty of basically not just Neo4j, but the Bolt protocol on as well, there is like the package that the driver uses. It's called Bolt, and it's like the lowest level you can get. It can be really interesting for either educational purposes or really really performance intense applications. So yeah, that's an option as well.
Thank you both. Thank you for answering.
Perfect. So yeah, like time is flying. We're already 45 minutes in. So the create with, I think, yeah, there is even an example later down the road. This is all stuff here. Here we go. Like in the nested arrays. Nested arrays, I tested it myself because I never really used nested arrays naturally, but maybe sometimes it'll happen. Neo4j does not support that. And I think that's mainly because it's considered an anti-pattern. The Abed already wrote about this in the previous example. What you're supposed to do in this case is use create with, or just in general, what you're supposed to do is if you're having nested arrays, you're probably needing multiple nodes with a relationship in between. So that's probably the anti-pattern you're stumbling upon. And then, of course, we go to the avoids in general. So joins are really interesting stuff because they are really necessary for SQL databases to work, but they make no sense for a graph, of course, because we have relationships to ease the joins. But of course, because this library is right now is trying to have feature parity, it'll use joins. Even though joins aren't supported in Neo4j, they also kind of are, because what you can do is you can match unrelated nodes with each other, and it'll just do a Cartesian product, and that essentially is the same as a join. So that's also how I implemented joins. If you were to use a query builder, I think I haven't tested this, so let's hope this works. There is this command again. Command. So what you could do is we have this table article, and you can just join it with something else if you would like to. And that'll be like the worst idea ever, but you can. Article comment. So what will happen here is if we were to run it, of course it crashes. Let's remove this one to be sure. Maybe that's because let's make it a cross join. That's why it's supposed to require a key. I think that was the issue. Yeah, so what it does here is it just matches an article. It remembers it. It'll then match the comment, and then it'll return everything. So that is what will really build like the worst queries, the slowest queries possible. And Neo4j, if you're doing this, will also issue warnings. And as I'm saying this, I feel like the driver should have a feature that converts warnings to exceptions. It doesn't yet, but it might be a configuration option that would be nice to have, especially for cases like this, because if you're migrating, you might be doing joins without really knowing. So getting a warning or an exception for that is probably really advisable. So if you were to run this, actually, I think I have yeah, of course, I'm only sharing this screen, but it should give you a big old warning if you run this. But you can do it. So yeah, that's also why I added this sentence. You were so preoccupied with whether you could, you did not stop to consider if you should. So yeah, they're basically just there for feature parity. So I extend on this with an NeoEloquent relationship. If you are just using the normal relationships, for example, if you're going here in the article, you have this has many relationship or belongs to relation. If you were to just use belongs to, of course, like it already starts to complain because it's supposed to have keys, relations, stuff like that. If you were to use this, it is going to make a join. So migrate to this one as soon as possible. We have the nested arrays one. Yeah, the Juggling Connections, I basically started the live stream with this. You can just choose a connection at runtime. Because you set the default to Neo4j, if you're not choosing a connection explicitly, for example, in the model definition, or when you are building a query, you're just gonna have the default one that you have configured. And also, because it's so tightly integrated, you can just run queries directly as well. So here is an example of running a query, a Cypher query on the Neo4j connection, and a SQL query in the MySQL connection. And then this is something that is still like a work in progress. I just haven't gotten to it. I know is there in the previous example, so in the previous version. So maybe if Abed has something to add to that, what is available right now if you're using the schema builder?
As the documentation mentions, there isn't much to migrate except when you're creating indexes. And this is what basically evolves with time and constraints, of course. In Neo4j, this is what basically changes from a migration to another. Unlike in SQL, where you will have to predefine your data model with columns and column types, etc. So this area is here because you often need to perform some operations on the database, and this is the place for it. We'll try to build as many functionalities as they come up. I can already think of running some functions here or something like that, but like the APOC functions or providing any helpful stuff, that would be really nice to have in here as well.
Yeah, indeed. I think that that in the future we should include like the APOC stuff, because it has not only just the constraints but incrementing IDs, automatic generation of UUID, stuff like that. Yeah, so that would be really interesting. I think if you're into Neo4j, it's not just APOC that does it, but I believe it are just database triggers in general. Maybe Florent knows a lot more about that. But I think you can extend like this functionality on the database level with tools like that.
Yeah, you would have to deploy some kind of plugin with you have a specific interface for that, which comes without any compatibility guarantees, and then you have to deploy that specific code and collocate it with the server basically. So.
But
You would need to.
if you want to have a good time, I think it's best to stay within the APOC library, right? Especially with Aura and stuff.
So yes and no. I mean, yes, with APOC, it's going to be much simpler with the APOC trigger functions. That being said, Aura supports a subset of APOC. It's actually documented online, so I'm gonna look it up now. But I'm not gonna hold you guys while I'm looking. But I'm not sure triggers are. Nope, they are not there. So it's not supported on Aura just yet, at least.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay, that's good. It's good to know. So I think it's something we can add, but it should also a warning to others as well. But there is still so much stuff to do. When we get there, it'll probably be a month or two past as well. So yeah, we have these. Yeah, this is something that I just explained here, like tables, nodes, and labels, and should be types as well there in relationships that I needed to add there. But in the previous version, it was basically all labels. What I mean by that is, if you wanted to let me, yeah. So for example, this is an article model. So automatically, NeoEloquent will try to use article as a label to build its queries. If you want to extend this behavior, right now, in the previous example, you would have to use label. So there would be a label variable that you could override and then be like, okay, this is not article, but articles. I don't know, maybe the label is just a little bit different like that. You could do it like that. You could also combine multiple labels as well. So you could be like, okay, the article is not just, shouldn't only have an articles label, it should only also have a text label or something like that. Because I was so focused on first integrating it deeply, I have temporarily removed it and it'll be scheduled for a later release, but we'll have to discuss about, and we'll need to have a discussion about this as well. But we're just keeping the table right now. So if you were to have to override this behavior, you would have to do table. And the reason, of course, that we're using table here is because it has to do with a feature parity with SQL again. The problem I was having mainly also with label is that the table property also still existed, so people could override table and then not really know why it didn't work. Whereas now there is only one place to change it. But I think it's a really important discussion to really think this through and make it that label can also be used. Also, because a model in some certain cases, and I'm talking more when it is behaving as a pivot table, it can also be a relationship type, so that then it becomes extra confusing. Whereas right now, it can only have one label or type. You define it there, and it's now under the table alias. But in the future, we should work out some solution that also makes it possible to use the word label. So that was my 2 cents about that one. And then, of course, like I said, if you don't define the table name, it is going to use the class base name and use a studly string. So I believe if you're using the Eloquent and it's using tables, it's going to do a snake case. And here it's a studly case simply because was being generally accepted as label formats. So yeah, that's just reminds me. If you still have something to add, Abed, about these label things, because I think that's pretty new information for you.
Yeah, I would just highlight that in several cases and in several projects that I've worked on, we used composite labels. I don't know whether this is best practice or not. It all depends on the use case and the scenarios. But I often found myself trying to work around it. Ideally, I would have liked to have inheritance implemented somehow, some sort of a composite label where, for example, a video is also a post and an article is a post, right? So post is the parent class, and article and video would inherit from that. So in the database, having inheritance in code would also be mapped in the database as post label and article label, or post label and video label.
Yeah, I think we're reaching the end of the live stream already, but I was just wondering if Florent had something to say about like composite labels, because I haven't really thought about that. If it's something that is something that is being used a lot in Neo4j, or if it is something that is generally discouraged.
I think it's supported to a point. Like, of course, it's supported if you have even many labels, but it's optimized. I think, if I remember, I heard the figure maybe around 10. I'm not exactly sure. So if you start, obviously with inheritance, like you're saying, you probably won't have a very deep nested hierarchy of classes. So you wouldn't have like hundreds or thousands of labels for a class to map to. So it's probably not an issue. So. But yeah, you think if you're interested in prior art, in terms of graph mapping and inheritance, I know the Spring Data Neo4j people have worked on it. And it's also interesting to look at, the regular object relational mappers as well, how they deal with inheritance. They have interesting approaches that could maybe translate well to, or at least partially to graphs. So yeah, my that's my improvised answer to you, really.
Let me add this to the roadmap because I've forgotten this. Of course, because it's also big. Multiple labels. It's not yet, but it is something. Let's call it under discussion. So by the end of, I'll probably by the end of the week we'll add all of these issues for all these features, so we can start discussing them publicly. So yeah, I'm thinking if let me just go over here. So this is all the roadmap of all the features, like I said, like connection resolving, transactions, connection statements, select column squares, exist queries. They're all there. Insert works except for the pivot relationships, which is why the many-to-many relationship doesn't work yet. Having and groups are still in testing. A lot of those are just already working. Relationship preloading doesn't work yet. This is something that's really important. We haven't had the time to go over it, but preloading is an essential tool for loading, for reducing the amount of database calls. So if you're going to read about the relationships in the Laravel documentation, there will be a pretty big section on that. Schema, it's right now it says no, but I think it's a work in progress or out of order, should be better. Create with is still a little bit out of order, so we have to fix that one. And then these are still under discussion. I already added multiple labels, so I was little bit too quick. So we have it twice now. And then end degrees relationship. Architecture really isn't that important. And then, of course, the special thanks is really important. So as Abed was saying, like the PHP ecosystem is growing pretty rapidly at the moment. Every month there are more downloads, more people joining. It's just good stuff in general. So in my opinion, it started a lot with Michal. He was the one who built the Bolt library. Without him, it wouldn't even be possible to connect to the Neo4j library in the first place. I believe he won an award, a community award, a few months ago, if I remember correctly. So he definitely deserved that one.
Indeed.
Sorry?
I was just saying indeed, yeah, he received as a recognition of his efforts because it's such a foundational software for the PHP ecosystem.
It is. Yeah. It's really foundational. And then, of course, Marijn, he's the one who built a Cypher DSL, which I use extensively in this library. Basically, it's a useful abstraction because the assumptions that are made when it is SQL sometimes means that different parts of the queries need to be built out of order, then is assumed, stuff like that. It becomes quite complicated. And because of this library, I was really able to abstract a lot of that stuff, making it easier to deal with. Then, of course, Abed, who's sitting here, he is just the maintainer of this project and basically just the pioneer of the NeoEloquent library. So without him, this wouldn't exist. It's a bit strange, but I gave myself the credit for the driver and the client because, yeah, that's basically that. And then just Neo4j itself, because they've really been helpful with providing the resources and just creating the soil that is needed. And I felt that really during the Graph Connect as well, that they are really concerned with the community and listening to these to people. There is a lot of I met a lot of open source aficionados there as well. And in particular, I'd like to thank Florent and Michael Hunger. So I talked a lot with them when working in the Neo4j and the Neo4j PHP sphere. So
thank you.
That's basically like bird's eye view of the project. The real world example is available because I figured it would be boring to just go over everything that I've changed. We've went over the features and you can look at it yourself if you want. You can download it, play with it. I thought the discussion was the more important part. So thank you all.
Yeah, thanks again. Your special thanks section is a great transition to the event next week because we're gonna have a special event with exactly Michal, Marijn, Abed, and Ghlen, and we're gonna discuss their perspectives, what brought them to the Neo4j ecosystem, their perspective on how it's going for PHP in general and PHP Neo4j in particular, etc., etc. And you will have the opportunity to ask questions to them directly as well. So the event is going to be announced pretty soon, if not today, tomorrow. So it's going to be on 22nd of June, same time as we had this stream today. And also, if I may, I'm not maintaining any of these projects, but they are open source. And as Ghlen and Abed explained, there are still lots of work to do. So if you want to contribute, don't be shy, even if you're not completely sure you're up to the task. People will help. I mean, I know from the Neo4j side, we love to help. I know Ghlen, Abed, and also the others are eager to help you to get started. So don't be shy and just contact the maintainers and you can start your open source journey very easily. So yeah, really don't hesitate. And maybe any closing word from you, Abed or Ghlen, before we wrap this up?
For me, no. I think I finished with the special thanks. That was for me the most important part to say, and I'm looking forward to next week as well.
Same here.
All right, in that case, so thanks everyone. We'll see each other next week with, we have half the team yet, so the other half of the team will be there as well, and you will have the opportunity to ask any questions related to PHP and Neo4j, and I will have also a couple of prepared questions, of course. So yeah, see you there. Take care of you all, and see you next week. Bye bye. Ciao ciao.
Bye.